November 17th, 1978, Speedway, Indiana. 4 teens vanished after a Friday night shift at the local burger chef. 2 days later, hikers find their bodies over 20 miles away in the woods. 2 were shot, 1 had been stabbed, and another had been beaten and left to die. All were still in uniform, but strangely none had been robbed. Investigators believed it had started as a robbery until one of the victims may have recognized the killers. You see, one teenager wasn't even supposed to work that night. He was covering someone else's shift. Is that why this escalated so badly? Unfortunately, we may never know. Police bungled the investigation from the start when they decided it was just a case of irresponsible teenagers. Police believed they simply walked across the street to the club to dance and would show up later. Why would they dump all the cash drawers and leave the safe standing open if they were just going to cross the street to party? People were allowed to tramps through the crime scene, and the morning crew was allowed to come in, clean up, and start work the next day. No photos or fingerprints were taken. Now, over 4 decades later, the case remains unsolved. With all of these mistakes, is the case even solvable? We are talking about a cold case that happened on November 17th, 1978. It was a Friday night at the local burger chef in Speedway, Indiana. 4 teenage kids were there cleaning up after hours, and we know that sometime right after midnight, somewhere between midnight and 12:30 in the morning, these 4 kids were taken. They were kidnapped from this burger chef. They were taken out into the woods and they were killed brutally. So we're going to be talking about the death of 4 teenage kids today. So these are the 4 children that were lost on November 17th, 1978. And so we're going to be talking about, this is Jane Freed, and I may be pronouncing her name wrong. I apologize. You've got Daniel Davis, you've got Mark Flemings, and Ruth Shelton. So these are the 4 teenagers. Now, Jane was actually 20, but just barely. So we've got 4 young people who were kidnapped and killed on November 17th, 1978. Somewhere between midnight and 12:30, these 4 people were marched out of the Burger Chef. They were marched out, taken to the woods. It was about half an hour drive away, and they were killed in the woods. Now, you'll find that some of them were shot in the back, you'll find some of them were stabbed in the chest, and you'll find one who was smashed across the face and ended up just dying by drowning in his own blood. So these were 3 different methods of killing, and there are 4 people that were lost. Now, what is really disturbing is at 12:30 a.m., an employee named Brian Crane, he comes by and he sees the place open. He comes by and he sees that the lights are on, which isn't necessarily unusual. They should be mopping and cleaning the tables and that sort of thing. But the back door is standing open a little bit, and that he finds odd because usually that door is bolted closed. So he steps in and he sees things are a mess. He sees that there's cash drawers strewn about. He sees what looks like chaos, but he yells for his friends. Nobody answers him. So he's afraid. He calls the manager. The manager tells him to call the police. The police do something unheard of. The police walk in. They see the same thing that Brian's seen. They see the cash registers. All of the drawers were open and empty. They see that the safe had been opened. All the cash was removed. The coins and things were still there, but the cash was removed. But they also see that the 2 teenage girls, their purses were still there where they belonged. They hadn't been disturbed. The cash was still in them. Their IDs were still in them. And they were still there. They didn't look like they had been moved. Instead of processing this as a crime scene, nobody can understand what was going through those officers' minds at that moment, but they did turn around. They locked the door. They said this is just a bunch of rowdy teenagers who wanted to go party. Now, across the street was an under 21 club called the Galaxy. They said, well, maybe they went over there to party, and that was all fine and well, but they did not go across the street to check out that story. Instead, they said these are just teenagers shirking their duties. They told the manager that everything was fine. They could open up the next day and go on with business. And so that is what they did. The next day, the manager brought in the daytime crew. The daytime crew, I'm sure they grumbled and fussed as they cleaned up after the nighttime crew who just didn't want to do their jobs. They cleaned everything up, completely destroyed the crime scene. No fingerprints, no photos, nothing was taken. Nothing was done appropriately in this case. And they opened for business the next day. Unfortunately, 2 days after this happened, just less than 2 days, I believe it was about 36 hours later, they find the bodies of these teenagers. So what do the police do? They go back to the burger chef and they try to recreate the scene that they seen 2 nights before. They tried to put the coats where they were, or the flannel where it was. They tried to put the cash drawers where it was, and this as best as they could remember, and then they took pictures. Now here's the problem. Over the years, some people say that they tried to pass those off as actual crime scene photos. I don't know if that is actually true or not, but I do know there was no original photos of that first crime scene. Now, if you think that they had screwed it up enough the first time around, surely the second time around, they were going to make everything better. They were going to do better with the second crime scene. So 2 days later, when they find these children in the woods, brutally killed and murdered, what do? I'm sure they cordon off the area and protect their crime scene. No, they don't. They absolutely do not. There were reports of people stomping through the crime scene. There were reports of people driving vehicles through the crime scene. They literally let the second crime scene be destroyed as well. So here we are. We are all these years later, and we have people who are still hurting, people who are still terrified at certain times of the year, family members who have never gotten justice. You've got a whole string of theories and nonsense. You've got some nonsense out there, but the reason why we're covering this case is because this case was tried to be tied to the case we talked about last week. So last week we talked about Marianne Higginbotham and her boyfriend Timothy Willoughby. Now, they were killed. Well, we know for sure she was killed because she was found in the barrel. But we were told by an informant that he was actually the target. He was killed and eventually dismembered and scattered across 3 counties. So at the time of this happening, we're talking November, so that was back 5 months prior to this. November, the Burger Chef murders happened, and you're going to find out that there was one very high, very drunken eyewitness who swore up and down that Tim Willoughby was in the getaway car, and he would fuss and go on, and he would swear that that's who he saw. But as we know, Tim Willoughby was scattered across 3 counties, so we know that he is not in this. So we're going to talk about that eyewitness. We're going to talk about what part of his testimony could be true, what part of his statement is most likely false. We're also going to talk about some different wild goose chases that people try to go on, and we're going to try to draw everything back down to a practical idea of what could have happened to these children. So that's my plan for the evening. We'll see. Hopefully we won't go off on a tangent. I wanted to go about this case because this one, I titled this Everything Wrong with the Burger Chef Murders. Now, this is what I want to get through to you. I am not one that bashes police. I was raised to bleed blue. And I still, to this day, get so many haters because I refuse to discredit a dead sheriff because there is no evidence that this guy ever did anything illegal. And I refuse to discredit him, even though that's the popular thing to do right now. And I get a lot of hate for it because I don't believe that's the way you do. If you strap on a gun and a badge and protect those in your community with those things, that is a hero in my book. So when I talk about, in this case, when I start talking about negativity towards the police, please keep in mind that I highly respect law officers. This is not a police bashing video. This is a idea that perhaps things were done incorrectly, and is there a possible way for us to fix it now? All these decades later, is there any possibility that these poor families can get some justice? And that's kind of the conversation that I want to have. Feel free to put your comments in the comments, and if I don't get to them right away, I will try to address them as soon as I can. So let's set the stage first. What's going on in Speedway right now during this time, 1978? You might say, well, the police maybe they made that mistake at the beginning because they're just inexperienced, or they don't have anything going on in town, and this is not really this is their first time out of the gate. They didn't know what to do. Okay, so the first thing we want to say is we want to give them the excuse that perhaps they were inexperienced. Okay, well, I'm going to take that off the table within just a few moments here. In this time frame, 5 months before, you have a man and his girlfriend who go missing. We'll find out 6 months after this event that she's been shot and put in a barrel, and he had been dismembered eventually and scattered across counties. So you got that happening 5 months before this. You, in this same area, you have major drug runners running drugs through the area. You also have someone bombing. Literally, they are leaving bombs around the area. 6 or 8, I can't remember which one. I read 6. I think Miss T read 8. So somewhere between 6 and 8 bombs were left around town. You've also got a ring, a theft ring, a car theft ring that had about 6 or 8 different people that traded off times of doing this. They would steal cars, they would run them through their chop shop, and sell the parts and make money. So you had a chop shop car theft ring going on, a very, very big one. You also had a group of men who went around with guns and robbed burger chefs and KFC. So you had an armed robbery group that had done at least 5 that we know of. You had this big car theft ring. You had drugs running through there. And then you also had someone setting off bombs. Okay, so you are literally trying to give them the excuse that maybe they're inexperienced and they don't know what to do. But you're in a town and in an area with all of this going on. So I contend you have to take the inexperience off the table. That can't be your excuse when you live in a town and in a community and a location, because it was not just one town. But when you live in an area that much crap is going on, you can't say you're inexperienced for very long. So to me, the fact that they dismissed it and said it's just teenagers not wanting to do their jobs, wanting to party, they probably went to the club across the road. They should have got their butts across the road and double checked that. They should have second guessed that thought when they see the girl's purses there. I don't know any teenage girl who's going to go off and have fun with their friends that isn't going to take their purse with their makeup and their wallet and their money and their driver's license. Besides the fact that all of them were under 21. So they were talking about maybe going to the one, and it was right across the road. The Galaxy was just right there. It wasn't like they were going to have to go across town and try to find this one or that one. So to me, if your thought process is, okay, these teenagers are gone off to party at the dance hall or whatever it was, the club across the road, get your butt over there and see if they're over there. If they're not and their purses are still there, you might ought to second guess that idea. You think that's, am I being unreasonable, girls?
No girl would leave that behind. And ID, like you need your ID.
Absolutely.
If
Absolutely.
they did go into that club or bar, now back then, now was pretty young then, but when I was 17, I was getting served an indictment. They didn't ask for ID,
Yes.
but I still had my ID and
Right.
my whatever, you know.
Right. Well, and it was an
You,
under 21, so they probably wouldn't be carded, but you'd
but
still
you
want
still
it if
wouldn't. Yeah,
you're gonna. Well, and the next thing is by the time the cops get there, the Jane Freed, um, her car was gone. So was she driving without her driver's license? Which we'll find out that's a kind of a strange twist and everything. The car was found, I think it was like a half mile away, and it was actually you could see the car where it was abandoned from the back door of the police station. So they literally abandoned it right next to the police station. So this is where people want to. Before I jump into that, Miss T, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
It's kind of like we talked about earlier. It doesn't matter if you think you know what happened, you're still going to treat it as a crime scene.
Absolutely. In reality, they should have treated it as a crime scene. If those teenagers had left their jobs and not done what they're supposed to and stolen, see, about $500 worth of cash was stolen. So that means those teenagers had committed a crime and stole $500. So they should have still dusted for fingerprints. They should have still cordoned off the area. They should have still took pictures. They still should have treated it like a crime scene, even though it would have been considered, maybe petty theft versus murder, which is what it turned out to be. They still should have done their job and done this. To me, and I wasn't really going to get into this drastic so early, but it's here. So, why would a cop do that? This is the question I pose to everyone in the audience, and whether you're watching now or you're watching the replay later. Why would a cop do that? Why would a cop walk in to a place where I think there was 4 register drawers that were open and empty, and the safe was open. It wasn't completely empty because there was coins and things in there, but all the cash was gone. Okay, so they walk into a place that looks like it's obviously been robbed. Why would a cop walk back out the door, lock the door, and tell the manager to open up the next day? I'm going to leave that there, let you come to your own assumptions. This is the thing. You got so much chaos going in town. Why would a cop do that? It doesn't make any sense. We've already taken off the excuse that they are inexperienced. Okay? Everybody knows you walk into a crime scene, you don't touch anything, you call the police, they're going to back you off, they're going to tape it off, they're going to take pictures, they're going to dust for fingerprints, they're going to do a specific procedure. Why would a cop back out and lock the door? That's what I want to ask you guys, and then we'll talk about that later on. Okay, so their first thought was let me go back. The car was found half a mile away. They're real close to the police station. Okay. It was a 1974 Vega. That was Jane's car. It was dumped right there. They found it 2 days later. Okay, so it wasn't quite 2 full days, but it was 2 days later they found the car, and it was literally right there by the police station. Okay. The keys were not in the car. They did find some paper bags that were from the burger shelf that had a footprint on it. So they did take a footprint. They did a look at the footprints. They found a random shoe. They also found a hairbrush that was just outside the back door of the burger joint. We'll find out that they found a pair of shoes that were there were some similarities between the shoe that was found in the car. They found some shoes under a bridge. as far as we can tell by the FBI report, you can go to the FBI vault and get the whole 414 pages of the FOIA request that's been submitted on this case, and so you can look at this stuff yourself. On page 12, you will find that they reference 3 different shoes. All of them on the bottoms said made in, what was it?
Made in Spain.
Spain.
Yeah, Spain.
And so it's like, it's not like made in China, it's made in Spain, and so nobody did anything with those shoes though. And so, but before we get too far with the shoes, the police were baffled because when they found the bodies in the woods, okay, Jane's keys were still in her coat pocket at her body, which was 30 minutes away in the woods. So they're like, oh my gosh, how did this happen? Somebody must have took her car and then taken the keys back to the body, or somebody, they couldn't figure out how the car could end up over here and her body and her keys end up over here. Because nobody remembers seeing, there was a suspicious van that was seen, and nobody remembers seeing that suspicious van following this car through town. Okay, so here's my thing. Nobody in none of the reports that I've ever seen has said one thing will completely answer that question for you. One thing, one very common thing, one thing that was easier to do in 1978 than now, which I think is common sense, but I've realized over the years that after I grew up reading Sherlock Holmes and Nancy Drews and all those things, I didn't read normal books. I read stuff like that. And then I got into true crime right away and action and I'm not normal, so I realize my brain thinks differently than other people's. But my first thought is, forget the freaking keys. It's not that complicated. Look under the dang dash and see if that thing had been hot wired. Because it's not that hard to hot wire a car back then. It's a little harder now. But back then, it's not as hard to hot wire a 1974 vehicle. But nobody ever looked at that.
And her car
it's not in any of the reports. I mean, that would be the first thing I'd look at.
Yeah, and her car was the only one seen in the parking lot. I haven't heard any mention of another vehicle seen in the Chef Burger parking lot.
Which I'm not so sure they had vehicles. I think they were dropped off or they walked or something like that.
I was thinking one other kid had a car there. Didn't Daniel have a car? I'm thinking.
I don't think so. I don't know.
Yeah, but I mean, as far as these shady characters that we're seeing, hanging around, at that time, there was no mention of another vehicle being seen.
Right. Exactly. Yep. So here's the thing. When you look through the FBI's report, on page 12, it starts talking about some things that they found. They did find a hairbrush just outside the back door of the Burger Chef. They did keep that and sent the hair off for analysis, so maybe they have some kind of DNA from that. I have no idea. Then they have 3 random shoes that say made in Spain on the bottom, the same size and everything. They're all 3 women's shoes. But they never do come to a conclusion on if they are related to this case or not. Now, my thought process is I would like to know, obviously the one shoe, which I never understand. How do you lose one freaking shoe? I don't understand that. Miss T and I have had this conversation. You're out on a hike and you find one random shoe. You're like, don't you notice?
Well, I do know a lot of people will drive and take one shoe off.
I always take both of mine off if I'm going to. And mine are heels, so I always have to make sure
Right.
in the seat next to me because they will get under the gas pedal. And they're usually huge. So I was like,
Yeah, because that's what I thought with them only finding one in the car. I'm like,
maybe she took one up. But see, here's my thing. One shoe, and then they think it's connected connected to the other 2 shoes that were found under a bridge. Okay. Here's my thought process. We need to know if those shoes are connected,
Yeah.
because that would at least give us the route they took out of town. Then we could follow the route they took out of town and see if there was more evidence that was chucked out the window. So to me, see, when they get to the woods and they do find the kids, they find that 2 of them were shot from the back. One was shot, it kind of went through here and came out the face, and you'll find one that came through the shoulder and then came out the face. They were shot from the back, lying down. Then you'll find that Jane actually had takeoff running. Somebody grabbed her from behind and over the shoulder, stabbed her twice in the chest. The knife broke off. They never found the handle. Okay. So that's the way she was killed. Now, Mark, he had taken a beating like right across here. And they're not sure if it was hit once through here or what he was hit with, but basically his nose was broken and shoved in, and his whole face was kind of caved in there, and he landed on his back with his hands up like this, kind of on a downward hill incline, which makes me think he may have landed and then slid downhill, but that's just my opinion because I couldn't find it in the report. But since he was laying back, he literally drowned on his own. So this is where we're at. You've got 4 kids who were killed in the woods. They never did find the handle to the weapon, to the knife that killed Jane. They do not know what hit Mark. They said maybe he was running and he ran into a tree. I find that ridiculous. You're running through the woods, running from someone. Say you're running from someone in the woods. You're going to be looking behind you periodically to see if they're close. You can understand that. How do you face plant a tree? Usually, if you run into a tree, you trip on the roots first. You might bang your shoulder into it. You might kick it and then trip over. Your face doesn't go first. You know what I mean? When you're running, you might hit it with your hand, you might hit it with your knee, you might hit it with your foot and then stumble over. I don't see you running face plant into a tree, face plant first. I say he was probably hit with something back at the Burger Chef, and I'll tell you why I think that. Well, we're going to go through some of the theories and the so-called confessions and things that we've heard. And I'll tell you why I'm kind of in line with that. But here's the thing. I don't think he face planted a tree.
No.
And that broke his nose. And he hit it so hard that it crushed his face in. And that was enough for him to fall backwards and suffocate on his own. I don't think... I have run into a lot of things. I'll tell you.
I lived in the woods.
I've never face planted one though.
My first job was a camp counselor. So yeah. I lived in the woods for a couple summers. Never have I ever had anyone run into a tree like that it would cause damage. They might trip, they might bump into it. But no, you'd have to be pushed, slammed, something to do that kind of damage.
Well, and to me, it was just right through here.
Yeah.
Right his nose and through here. That is more in line with someone swinging a bat coming right across your face.
Yeah, because if you hit a tree, your head would hit it first before the front of your
head,
face.
Your shoulder, something would hit it, I think, before your face. So I do not believe he hit his face. So I believe they should have looked in that car to see if it was hot wired, because to me it's not that big of a mystery that her car ended up on the other side in the opposite direction from where they went, and then her keys are still on her person. That doesn't surprise me, because they thought, well, maybe they piled them all in that car and then they piled them all out of that car and into their getaway car, and they left that car there, so you've got 6 people crammed into this car. or maybe they some of them went here and they followed them in their car and trying to work out the key situation, which to me, just look to see if the car's hot wired. That would have saved yourself a whole lot of problem. To me, it's obvious that car was planted there as a diversion, trying to get the cops to go that way when they were going in the opposite directions. To me, that's obvious. But of course, like I said, I don't think like normal people. This is, I've just read too much of this stuff to really think that way, I guess. But in my thought process, that car was hot wired. It was planted there to throw police off the track. That's where I go with that. You girls agree, or am I off the wall on that?
No, I agree.
Because nothing else makes sense.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Well, nothing else makes sense to me, but like I said, I'm a little odd. I am finding I don't think like other people do. So
I thought it was interesting that they said none of them had defense wounds
right.
on their hands.
No,
I guess when they shot the two, I guess maybe they caught them off guard. Maybe caught them by surprise, and then the other two started running.
There's no defense wounds on anybody, and that's the whole thing that makes me. They were marched out there. Two of them laid down and were shot in the back of the head, basically, and
they must have been told. Maybe they were told they were just going to let them go, or something.
Something. I don't know. So here we go. We're going to start talking about Don Forrester. Now, Don Forrester is someone that if you watch some of the documentaries that were made, you're going to find out that they believe Don Forrester was the guy for a long time. I don't, but I will tell you why I don't, and then you don't have to agree with me. That is fine. I'm an adult. You don't have to agree with me, and I will be okay with that. I know some people, they're not okay when you don't agree, but I'm okay with not agreeing. It'll be all right. But Don Forrester supposedly confessed in prison. He said that he was the one that did that. He took them out there. He shot them. He said it was all due to a drug debt, and that he took him out there and he shot him in the woods. And then he had this story, and his wife backed it up, that him and his wife had gone back to that crime scene where the bodies would eventually be found. And they had picked up all of his shell casings. He had taken them home and flushed them down the commode, which he actually had a septic tank, and the police actually would find them in the septic tank later. So they do have these bullets, and this is all wonderful and great. So now they have their man. Unfortunately, his story does not match. There's too many things that don't make sense. For one, his gun was a .22. They never could match those bullets that were in the septic tank. They never could match them to the guns or the weapons that were used to kill these kids. Now, they never found the guns either, so they couldn't prove that these bullets went to anything. They do know what kind of gun it was. They never found the guns, but they weren't .22s. Also, he said he shot one of them. When they go through and say, okay, well, how did you do this? He specifically says he shot one of them in the face. Well, in reality, he didn't shoot any. None of them were shot in the face. The two that were shot from back. The entrance wounds were in the back. They exited out the face. So that wasn't quite right. Then he said he tied them up with some wire. He restrained them with wire until he could figure out what he was going to do. Well, none of these children were bound, and none of these guys had any kind of ligature marks on them whatsoever. So that didn't add up. Then you find out that one of the men that he said was one of his cohorts was actually in jail the night that this happened. So none of his stories really started adding up, and they started falling apart. The police pushed really hard to put him in jail for this, and they were actually kind of upset when the prosecutor refused to prosecute this man. He said there was too many stories, inconsistent, and this man, by this time, when he actually did his confession in 1989, was actually in jail for 95 years or 99 years for other crimes that he had committed, and they said, well, it'll be fine. He's already in jail. So everybody was up in the air saying that this guy was the one that did it. He confessed. How could he be wrong? And then you'll find out that there was some more police tactics that were kind of interesting. You'll find out that they put him in a room where, in their war room, where all of their evidence was tacked on the walls before they started asking him questions. You'll also find out that most of the questions they asked were very leading questions, and so you'll find out that most of the case that he repeated back to them was actually fed to him by them. So whether it was intentional or not, we're not going to lay blame anywhere. You'll find out that this would not stand up in a court of law today if they went to prosecute this man today, because of the way they got the confession. And then, of course, he does end up recanting. Now, I want to talk about two people that I think, well, before we do that, okay, I'm going to skip to the next person that gives a confession. And I want people to understand, and I didn't understand this until I worked with Sidney for so many years on his book. I didn't understand how people think like this. But in prison, you live off of a different set of rules than what you do out here. You live based off of your perceived badness, how tough you are perceived, your connections that are perceived. They don't have to be legitimate or real. But like Sidney, he got a lot of amenities and things in jail that other people didn't, because everybody thought he was connected to the Italian mob and the Mexican mob. Well, he did have a few connections, but nothing that would lend him that kind of street cred. Okay, just because he had worked with a few people before and kind of had some names that he could drop, people perceived him to be bigger than he was. So he got things. He got favors. He got things brought in from the inside, outside. He got contraband. He got things to make his life better. Okay. Well, behind bars, they're always jockeying for power, and they're always jockeying for a better situation. And so when you have an inmate give you a confession, a lot of times it's because they want out of where they are. Okay. Now you have an inmate named Alan Pruitt. Now Alan Pruitt happened to be in jail. This was years later with Jane's brother. Jane's brother was named James. Now he was in jail for selling coke, and he was a known drug dealer at the time. He wasn't the big wig that we'll talk about later, but we will know that there was rumors going around that James had a $15,000 drug debt and his sister was killed for it. And Alan Pruitt was intelligent enough, sarcasm there, to address this with this brother behind bars, and he was lucky he wasn't beaten plumb to death, but he brought it up to James. Okay, well, then all of a sudden, after this happens, after this little fiasco with the brother and accusing the brother of such a thing, which was totally not smart, he decides he has to confess. Okay, so he confesses that night he was across the street at the Dunkin' Donuts. He also confesses that he was high on 3 things mixed together, and drinking and smoking all together. He was literally going outside because he needed some air. I would not know why, but he needed air and he was going to smoke. And while he was standing beside the building, he seen this orangish looking van come up, and he said he remembers the van. He'll never forget the van because of those dumb, stupid looking white wheels on it. Okay, now then he takes it a step further and he says, I know the 2 men that got out of that van. That's a guy named Jeff Reed and a guy named Tim Willoughby. There you go. That's your connection between last week's case and this week's case. You got someone high on 3 different narcotic substances and drinking and smoking and can barely stand, and he's literally saying, I saw these guys. And then he says, well, I was 300 yards away. It was 12:30 in the morning and it was very dark and there wasn't much for street lights, but yes, I guarantee you it was Tim Willoughby and Jeff Reed. Now, here's the thing with that van. Other people in the area saw a van and gave similar accounts of the van. Now, depending on where the van was, it changed in color slightly, but they all basically described the same van, because you'll find out that Jeff Reed did own a van that was somewhat like that, and it was orange. But you'll also find out that there were some other vans like that around that were kind of rust colored and cream colored, and under these orangish looking lights, they all looked orange. So you're going to find out that there was other people that seen the van. You will also find out that Alan Pruitt was at the Dunkin' Donuts. They were able to verify that. But what they could not justify was the fact that Tim Willoughby had disappeared 5 months earlier with his girlfriend. Now, 6 months after this event happened, they'll find his girlfriend. She was shot in the back of the head and stuffed in a barrel. You'll find out 4 years after this, when an informant comes forward, that Tim was killed the same time. Tim was the target. His girlfriend was collateral damage. You'll find out that they wanted to get rid of Tim. They didn't want him to be found, so they cut him up and they distributed him across 3 counties. So this man could not have seen Tim Willoughby at this time. So why would he say something like that? Why would he change his story? Then you'll find out, once it comes public and Marianne's body's found in the barrel, all of a sudden he changes his confession. He says, well, no, it was Jeff and somebody else. And then he changes it. At one point, he says there was 2 black men driving this van. There was another point in time before Marianne's body was found that he said, well, yeah, and I got in that van and Marianne was in the back and she was all upset because they were trying to make her shoot one of the kids. And he had this big, long, rambling story. And we all know for a fact that Marianne and Tim went missing 5 months before this happened. Okay? So we know that his story cannot be true to a point. I do believe that he actually saw that van. And the reason why I do, for one, there's other people that seen the van. But when you start studying how memories are formed and how recalling memories happens in the brain, you'll find out that anytime you're really highly emotionally responding to something, you're going to remember that piece of the information better than anything else. When he got so emotionally attached to the fact, even now, when you watch the documentary that they talked to him about it, they interviewed him for that documentary, he went on and on about those stupid looking white wheels. Okay? That is a point of emotional attachment there. So that part of his memory, I believe, I trust that part. Now, you're going to find out that Jeff Reed may or may not be involved. You're going to find out that we've already established that it could not have been Tim Willoughby in there. But you're going to find out that there's 2 other people that a lot of things add up towards them as well. So you've got this guy that Jeff Reed, okay, he may have seen someone that looked like Jeff Reed. Again, I contend he's extremely intoxicated. He is also 300 yards away, and it's a very dark part of town. The only lights are these orangey little lights. You can't see very far. Anyways, 300 yards away across the road, I contend you couldn't see nobody. But here's the thing. I do believe he's seen the van. I do believe so because other people seen a van that they described similarly, and his emotional attachment to those wheels makes me think, okay, he probably did see the van. Now, he may have seen somebody that looked like Jeff Reed. Now, we're going to find out somebody else that kind of solidifies who was seen there. We have another witness, 2 witnesses actually. But before I move to them, girls, do you have something to say about the legitimacy of Alan Pruitt's statement? Cricket, I'll let you.
I have something, and it's kind of funny, but because he was intoxicated and all these other things. When I was younger and I was out one night, a very intoxicated person believed that I was Brooke Shields. So, and I played along with it, but it just goes to show in that state, I don't look like Brooke Shields in any way.
Well, I'll give you an even better one. There's a Heidi story in my Unorganized Crime. If you read that book about Sydney, he talks about he was high on heroin at the time, and he seen the most beautiful Heidi girl on the side of the road hitchhiking, and he picked her up, and he was thinking about all these horrible things that he wanted to do, and all of a sudden he's like, she was so beautiful, so perfect, she had the beautiful blonde braids, just perfect stereotypical Heidi. And he said he was sitting there talking to her, about, he wanted to sleep with her, and he said he watched her as he was driving just shrink down until she poofed into a puff of smoke. And he goes, yeah, that's when I decided I probably should stop doing heroin. And I said, you think really? So I'm sitting here going, I don't believe anyone that is extremely high, that high, and so to me, his story just it doesn't fit with what we know. But because of that man and his story, you'll find out that they still tried to tack last week's case and this week's case together. And you'll find out that there's nothing that actually connects them but this man and his drug-fueled story. So there's no evidence that they're connected in any other way. There's nothing else there. And that's what I find disturbing. So Miss T, did you have any comment on that before we move?
Was Alan Pruitt, was he at the Dunkin' Donuts or was he at that disco? I thought it was at the disco. Was at the Dunkin' Donuts?
He was at the Dunkin' Donuts.
That makes more sense.
One documentary said he was at the disco, but the FBI files said that they was at the Dunkin' Donuts, which was right directly across the road.
That makes more sense because when you look on the map of the disco, it's across the street and then across the field and the big parking lot.
It's a little ways away.
Yeah.
I wondered about that. So that makes sense. He was close.
See, that documentary says that he was across the road at the depending on which one you watch. There were several that I watched, different videos, and one of them said that he was at the Galaxy, and but you look at the FBI files, he was at the Dunkin' Donuts, and they verified that he was at the Dunkin' Donuts. So he was there, and I do believe he's seen a van, and I do believe that he recalled the van because of something he noticed odd about there that he didn't care for. So that made him notice it and remind him of it later. Then somebody got out of it that he thought he knew. But I contend that he didn't see Tim, because Tim, we'll find out, he was gone. He was presumed dead by then. But you'll also find out that there's another connection between Alan Pruitt and Timothy Williams, and there was a reason why he wanted to throw Tim under the bus. Okay, so here is something else. Now, we've gone into some fantastic tales, and like I always say, when a story gets too fantastical, stop and go back to the practical. And I don't even know if fantastical is a word, but it rhymes with practical, so there you go. So you're stuck with it, sorry. But here's the thing. They want to make this about so many other things. Go back to the basics. The basics are, there was a robbery crew in town that was robbing these stores, okay? So keep that in your mind. While we have Alan over there in his drunken stupor, swearing that he saw this ugly wheeled van, you have two other teenagers who were out smoking a joint. They were kind of in behind things, and they were smoking a joint, and they needed to go in and find matches. Well, they went into the Burger Chef and they got matches. Okay, this is before everything happened. Because one of the workers gave them the matches. They come back out. A few minutes later, they're there in the dark, smoking their joint, trying to hide, and they hear a man clear his throat. And they look up, and there's two men standing over them. They're pretty shadowed. You can't see them clearly, but two men are standing over them. One's bearded, one's clean-shaven, one's big and muscular, one's small. And they said, you kids need to get out of here. There's been a lot of vandalism. Okay. Now, they hurry up and get out of there because they're afraid they're going to be in trouble, because they thought maybe they smelled the joint and then they're going to get in trouble. To their surprise, they didn't get in trouble. They just ran off and everything was fine. Well, those two men are believed to be the two people who robbed the burger chef and stole these kids. Now, they had sketches made. They even made some little busts of what they thought these people looked like. Now, here's what's creepy about it. There were two men in the robbery crew. Two men, S.W. Wilkins and Greg Steinke. I think that's Stanky. I don't know. Steinke. We're going to call him Greg S. So Greg S. There you go. So here we go. You've got S.W. Wilkins and Greg S. Okay? Now, Greg and S.W. Wilkins fit those perfectly. They look just like those sketches. Then, to make it even crazier, the man that Alan Pruitt swore he saw was Jeff Reed. Jeff Reed was a big, muscular, bearded guy. Okay? He looks a lot like S.W. Wilkins. Okay? So the fact that Alan's over there in his stupor and says, "Hey, I seen Jeff Reed over there." Did he see Jeff Reed or did he see S.W. Wilkins? Because they were both bigger, muscular, bearded men. They both look similar, especially if you're out of your mind on all kinds of dope and it's dark outside. So I contend that when you look 300 yards away, in that state, he could have been seeing S.W. Wilkins. Now, S.W. Wilkins and Greg S., they both match the witness statements of the two men that got onto the kids and told them to not smoke their joint there. Okay? That was right before all of this went down. Okay? So you've got these two men are linked by, they look like this. They would also later confess and be charged with 5 robberies at the Burger Chef restaurants around the area. Okay? So they look like the people, the witness statements, the witness sketches. They also have confessed to robbing burger chefs in the past. But then they also kind of resemble who the other guy thought he saw. Okay? If that's not a connection, then here's the next thing. Both of them lived within a couple minutes drive from where the bodies were dumped. So they were taken from the burger chef in town. They were drove 30 minutes away and dumped in this forested area. Both of these robbers live within a minute's drive of that area. Okay? So that's what connects them to this thing. They say, well, maybe, but nobody ever got killed at any of the other robberies. Well, I contend that if you are going in, you're busting into a place of business with a loaded gun, you don't know you're not going to kill somebody. And you are ready to do that. So just because they hadn't killed before doesn't mean that something couldn't have gone wrong and they killed now. Okay?
And that's what got to me the most. The fact that these are 4 young people. The fact that they were kidnapped from a store and killed elsewhere. I have never heard of robbers who break into a store to rob it and kidnap the employees.
Well, see, to me, that lines
could have been like, we really need to get on this, but they screwed everything up.
Mm-hmm. Well, see, this is something that was mentioned later. Jane had mentioned to other people that Mark was basically her bodyguard, her protection. Okay? He had been taking karate or something, and he was her protector. Why did she need a protector? So everybody's wondering. And then her brother gets in trouble for drugs. You'll also find that this restaurant, the Burger Chef, was a known drug drop. They would literally leave drug drops in the bathrooms. Now, here's something going back. When the employee came up and seen the back door open, he said something that really made me stop and think. And this is something I couldn't find in the police records. Of course, a FOIA records don't give you everything. There was somebody else there. There was a former employee there who had been fired from there for drugs. Okay? A former employee there around the back door who didn't belong there. When Brian came up there and noticed the door open, he was going to call the manager. That former employee says, "I want nothing to do with it," and runs off. Why didn't the police check that guy? To me, that former employee, if he had been legitimately fired from that place and he was hovering around the back door, he had no reason to be there. That would be a person of interest in my book. Am I wrong, girls?
No, I would check in. I mean, that's why I've never gone back to a job that I left.
I
Even to visit, I've never,
Yeah. Yep.
Other than the church, because I was a Sunday school teacher.
Right. But you weren't fired from being a Sunday school teacher,
No.
were you? Were you fired from being a Sunday school teacher because of drugs?
No, I wasn't fired from jobs, but I never went to them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like you move on.
Right. So to me, I thought that would be one of the first people that I look at would be that person. And they weren't.
Especially when they've destroyed all the evidence. So, that's the next best thing is start talking to people, I would think.
Exactly. But you were talking about officers that were supposed to be doing a job that obviously did not do it for whatever reason. Okay. So here's where things get crazy. You've got the two kids smoking weed that get run off by the bearded man and the clean-shaven man. The bearded man and the clean-shaven man both point towards the robbers. Okay, the armed robbery. You also have that witness sketch, that suspect sketch. That also kind of looks like Jeff Reed. Now, Jeff Reed ended up telling a friend later on that he was responsible for some things, and that friend goes on and finally makes this big confession on the documentary. "I've held this secret for 40 years, and Jeff confessed to me that he wasn't responsible." So they're like, "Well, how did he do it?" "Well, I don't know exactly. He's just responsible." And then he rattles on for 15, 20 minutes, never really gets to any point or gives any details. So I think Jeff may have been responsible for something, but that guy didn't know anything about it. And so this is where we're at. Here's the next thing. We're going to talk about Brett Kimberlin. Brett Kimberlin was a local drug dealer who was convicted of having a grandmother killed and convicted of the bombings. He swears to this day that he was not involved in either one of those things. But there are people around the area that still say he was running the drugs through the town and he was the dangerous one and he was the one that was in charge of all this. So here's my question. Was Jane targeted because of a drug debt? If that's the case, why did they take her and all those other kids? If she owed a debt, why didn't they rob her and take it off her bill? If she thought she needed protection and Mark jumped anybody who came in that back door, is that why he got slammed in the face with something? Because see, the one thing that guy said Jeff told him, was Jeff slammed him across the face with the Louisville Slugger because Mark came after him. He was there for the money. Mark came after him because he was the protection. Mark came after him, slammed him across the face with the Louisville Slugger. Mark fell down and they thought they killed him, so they put him in the back of the van and they didn't know what to do. They panicked and they took all the other kids with them. at gunpoint. Now, to me, that's the only thing that makes sense. If they thought they killed one of them by accident, they're going to take everyone else out. That's also why they never did do anything else to Mark. That also makes a whole lot more sense. His facial structure, the way it was crushed in, makes more sense that he was hit across the face with a bat than he slammed his forehead into a tree. That's also why they would never shoot him. They didn't stab him. They didn't do nothing else to him. They thought they already killed him.
Was it for sure a baseball bat? Because
They don't.
I was thinking.
That's what the witness said. Jeff told him.
Well, I was thinking they could have slammed his head on the table too, and it would make a mark. On the edge of the table would make a mark like that.
Not where his injury was.
I don't think there's any table at a fast food restaurant that would withstand that.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't mention anything about the tables being broken. There was one person who said they thought they slammed him across the bumper of the van. So he came after him and they slammed him like this, and he hit the bumper of the van, and then fell down, and they thought they killed him and threw him in. So to me, any of those things, the table, the bat, the bumper of the van, all of those things make more sense than face planting a tree. It also makes more sense why it would have escalated from a robbery to killing 4 kids. They thought they already killed one, so they took the other 3. So my theory is this. It could have been Jeff Reed. Jeff Reed died in 2011, so we may never know. I contend it could have also just as easily been those 2 guys, Wilkins and Greg S. Could have just as easily been them. Because if they thought they accidentally killed one of the kids, their next thought would be, we have to get rid of them all. That's my thought on it. So girls, what do you think? Did I cover everything? There's so much more we can
I think you covered it up pretty much. The thing that gets me now, because obviously they came in and cleaned up.
Mm-hmm.
But there was never any mention of any blood in the restaurant itself.
No. Mm-mm.
So the bumper thing, that kind of fits. Running.
Bumper thing or the bat.
Yeah, but outside of there.
Well, see, that was the thing.
Back door.
They said that they waited at the back door for Mark to bring out the trash.
Okay, that makes sense.
And so they hit him with the bat. Or
because it would have to be.
They slammed him down and he face planted the bumper. Is what?
Because
there's
both of
2
those
different
would
people who are saying that it was Jeff Reed. There's 2 different people who said it was Jeff Reed, and they both have a different story on how he thought he killed Marcus.
Right, but both of the area that his face was injured, both of those would fit.
Mm-hmm. It really would. And I don't think the table, just because there wasn't any blood on the table, and they didn't say anything about tables being broken. And I contend that they would probably be broken, but either way, there would have been blood. And they didn't. That's the thing. When you walked into the crime scene, the only thing that made it look like a crime scene was these kids aren't there, their purses are still here, but all of the money drawers are scattered everywhere and they're empty. There was no blood anywhere.
Yeah.
And,
and because they messed up, they had to put things kind of like put the purses back and kind of stage it, but you know,
right.
It was too late because everything was already lost.
Right.
You had
here's what I contend. They say that Brett Kimberlin was running drugs across the borders, international drug dealer. And at first I thought that sounded a little bit far-fetched, and then I realized he is probably running drugs through the Speedway. Okay? And the reason why I say that is because there's some big major cases where they were running drugs through NASCAR at one time. And they were running drugs through different racing events and things.
Yeah, and that's the main
and
artery.
Right. So that could be how he was running it so far, and his reach was so far. But then I also say, and this is where I go back to my original statement about I am not bashing police here. You have to have dirty cop somewhere to do that. You don't have that ability to run through that big of an operation without having some official people in your pocket. To me, you don't walk in with any kind of training whatsoever. You don't walk into a restaurant where 4 kids are missing, see the money drawers all over the place with no money in them. You see the safe open with no money in it. The car is missing, but the purses are still there. You don't walk in and then walk back out and say, they're off partying, they're just a bunch of teenagers, and go on. That doesn't happen. They're not idiots. They're not stupid.
And these were good employees.
Exactly. So what I'm saying is, the only way I feel like this case is going to be solved, nobody wants to say it, nobody wants to do it, nobody wants to believe it. But if this Kimberlin was so big, running so much dope, gotta look for some dirty cops. Not all of them, just takes one.
Yep.
But here's my thought. If you want this case solved, and this is just me, like I said, I'm not an official. I don't have a badge. I've had a lot of education, self-education from books and things, but I've written 300 cases. I'm telling you, if you want this case solved, you need to go back to square one, find the dirty cop, and follow that. And then you'll probably be able to solve this case. No cop's going to walk into the back of that restaurant and say, they're off partying, and not at least walk down the road to the Galaxy and see if they're over there. No good cop would do that. I don't care how educated or lack of educated they are. They wouldn't do that. Something's wrong with that story. Right there. Something's wrong when they don't protect the first crime scene. They screw up. Everyone knows they screw up. And then they turn around and do it again on the second crime scene. So I say, if you want this case solved, back off your ego trip and go back and look at the cops that were involved. There was a dirty one in there somewhere. I guarantee you. And that's just my opinion from writing 300 cases and studying this crap like a maniac. Girls, what do you think? We're over an hour. Yeah. I'm sorry it's so long, guys.
I agree, because those things could not be done without somebody turning a blind eye and knows what's going on.
Mm-hmm. I'd say there's probably somebody connected to the drug world in there. Mm-hmm. There may have been someone connected. There was a prosecutor who refused to prosecute even after everything was proven. In the Timothy Willoughby and case that we talked about last week.
And look for cops too, like that were involved. But what did their houses look like? Because
absolutely,
I say
look around. I say the reason why
this
case isn't solved, you've got a dirty cop somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
You've got something dirty there that's not operating the way it's supposed to. Somebody's tied to the drug scene. Somebody's tied to that chop shop with the cars. Somebody's tied to something that they're not supposed to. So they backed off of this one. They didn't do what they're supposed to do. I get it, and nobody's blaming anybody that's there now. But I think if you want this case solved and you truly want justice in the case, you're going to have to back up and realize one of your boys or girls in the blue may have been a little bit gray at the time. That's kind of where I'm at. Today's episode is brought to you by Bones Coffee Company. You can forget about boring coffee when you drink Bones Coffee. Not only do they offer a variety of flavors such as strawberry cheesecake and maple bacon, they are a family-owned company that puts great detail not only in their coffee, but in the artwork that comes on each individual bag. Bones Coffee has a coffee club that will deliver your favorite coffee to your door every month. If that wasn't enough, they also have some amazing swag to offer. Check out Bones Coffee Company today. I'll have my affiliate links in the show notes for you.